Hello again, you're watching the Kay Burley Show. Our top story, more on that, the arrest of the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in central London. He'd been in the building for nearly 7 years after seeking refuge to avoid extradition to Sweden. He was detained after the Ecuadorian government withdrew his asylum. Mr. Assange is currently appearing at Westminster Magistrates Court, charged with breaching his bail conditions. He is also facing extradition to the US over alleged conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. With me now is human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. Hello to you, thanks for joining us. You're not happy?
Absolutely not. I mean, what Julian Assange did was publish information that had been leaked by Chelsea Manning. He was not the leaker. He published the information in the same way that the Guardian newspaper and the New York Times did. What's interesting is that the Trump administration is not going after the New York Times or the Guardian, only after Julian Assange. Moreover, what he published was the truth, and the American government and military should be accountable to the American people. They have a right to know. It's only thanks to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange that they know about the war crimes committed by the US in Iraq and Afghanistan and government duplicity. So I believe that Julian Assange has performed a great public service, and far from being a criminal, he's a hero.
That's not why he skipped his bail, though, was it?
Well, the skipping of the bail is a separate issue. Obviously,
that's what he's been arrested for.
Well, he's been arrested both for skipping bail and in connection with...
Subsequently, he was arrested. He was re-arrested in connection with the computer situation in the US. But he was actually arrested for skipping bail.
Yeah, but he has now been, according to Theresa May, he was also arrested in connection with a US extradition request. So I find it shocking that the British government is doing the bidding of the Trump administration. We should not be consorting and colluding with a regime in America that is suppressing freedom of expression and press freedom, because that's the core issue. Julian Assange is a publisher, not a leaker. He did not leak anything. Chelsea Manning did the leaking. Julian Assange merely published it in the same way that the New York Times and the Guardian did. So this is an attack upon the right to publish, upon press freedom and freedom of expression.
Of course, it wasn't the Trump administration when he went into the Ecuadorian embassy, was it? No,
but it's a US administration, and the Trump administration now has pursued him with a particular viciousness. They've made it very, very clear they want him prosecuted, they want him jailed. Trump administration officials have said this. And I think it's completely incompatible with First Amendment rights, freedom of expression, and so on.
And what about the Swedish allegations against him?
Well, that's another issue, and I've always said that Julian Assange should face those charges of sexual assault and rape. He's always been willing to face those charges, to answer questions. Now it's up to the Swedish authorities.
But that's what his bail was related to, wasn't it?
That's right, yes.
OK, so as a result, him being arrested by the British police today and then appearing in court, I take your point as far as the US is concerned, but that's what he was arrested for today in connection with the Swedish allegations against him.
Well, it was skipping bail, yes.
Yes,
so the charge
was in relation to the Swedish allegations.
The charges he will now face are skipping bail, not, as yet anyway, any charges in relation to the Swedish accusations.
That's because he ran down the clock.
Well, the case could be reopened. And, you know, I'm not defending Julian Assange over the allegations, and there are purely allegations about sexual assault. I'm not defending him on that issue whatsoever. But I do defend him as someone who exposed US war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, that was a very important thing to do.
Understood. But you are content that he would have been arrested today for skipping bail in connection with what happened in Sweden, allegedly. You have no problem with that?
Well, he had a case to answer. He skipped bail. So he has always accepted that that was an issue that had to be dealt with. The question is, how should it be dealt with? He's already de facto served nearly 7 years incarceration in the Ecuadorian embassy.
That doesn't count.
So I would have thought that a British judge would hopefully adopt a fairly lenient approach to his charge of skipping bail. I mean, obviously he should face punishment, but there's no need for it to be severe. It's not in the public interest. There's no British public interest in pursuing Julian Assange.
Well, there is, because allegedly he committed these offences in Sweden. He answered bail originally in the United Kingdom. He then felt that he didn't have to do that anymore, potentially above the law, went to the Ecuadorian embassy and has now subsequently been arrested by upsetting the Ecuadorians to the extent where they no longer want to protect him.
Well, we don't know why the Ecuadorians have acted. We do know leaks
from the Ecuadorian president today, haven't we?
No, we have heard leaks from Ecuadorian officials that there has been pressure by the US authorities to extradite Assange, and that pressure has included the option of trade deals and debt relief. I suspect that President Moreno is in big difficulties right now. He wants a win. He appears to have colluded with the Trump administration to secure Julian Assange's arrest. But I don't think it's anything other than a bid by the Ecuadorian authorities to do the bidding of the United States for whatever reason.
OK, but just to be 100% crystal clear what we're talking about, you are content that he was arrested in order to answer allegations of skipping bail in connection with what happened in Sweden, allegedly, but you are not happy about further charges as far as the Americans are concerned and potentially being extradited there. Is that what you're saying?
Well, as a political asylum refugee, granted Ecuadorian citizenship and granted asylum by Ecuador, then he should have been allowed to go to Ecuador right from the get-go, from the moment he was granted asylum.
How would he be able to get there?
That was the issue. But of course, the British government should have honoured the principles of the Refugee Convention and allowed him to go to Ecuador. That obviously didn't happen.
But he had to accept the conditions of his bail in order to have been released.
Yes, absolutely.
So he broke the law.
Yeah, he did, and he will face those charges. But the point is, when someone is granted political asylum, they are supposed to be given free passage under the Refugee Convention to go to the country where they've been granted asylum. That did not happen. It was obstructed by the British government in a way which really I don't think served the British interest.
Because he'd broken the law here?
Yeah, he had skipped bail. But that is a very minor offence in the big scheme of things.
Okay.
And I think we need to focus on the big scheme of things, which is
that
he blew the whistle.
The reason that he was on bail in the first place was very serious allegations of sexual crimes in Sweden.
Yeah. And he, from the get-go, offered to meet the Swedish authorities.
He did meet the Swedish authorities.
Here in Britain.
He did.
Yeah, but they took about 6 years to do it. He'd been offering it since 2010. He'd been allowed to leave Sweden originally in, I think, 2010. Being told there was no charge to answer. But when the charges were further pressed, he did offer to meet with the Swedish authorities in London. They delayed and refused, allegedly under some pressure from the British authorities, for, I think, 5 or 6 years. So that's part of the problem. But we are where we are, and he has now been arrested. He's going to face these charges of skipping bail. Obviously, he has to face some kind of punishment, but skipping bail is not a huge offence. It's not a minimal offence, but it's not a huge offence. And I would hope that there would be some leniency shown to him, given all the time he has effectively spent in incarceration in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Self-imposed?
Well, self-imposed because the main reason...
Because he skipped bail?
No, the main reason is that he feared extradition to the United States. The reason he didn't go back to Sweden was he feared that either the British or Swedish authorities, once he'd left the embassy, would secure his extradition to the United States to face these very serious charges. A US secret grand jury has been convening for 8 years. It has never published what the charges are. Even his lawyers don't know the charges, although they have been released this afternoon. But until now, he's never known what those charges were. But key Trump administration officials were calling for even charges under the Espionage Act, which carries the potential death penalty, and other charges which carry 30, 40 or 50 years imprisonment.
But he would not have been sent from the United Kingdom to a place where he was likely to face the death penalty. That's not what we do here in the United Kingdom. We just don't.
Yeah, we don't. But neither should he be sent somewhere where he could face possibly 30, 40 or 50 years jail. What he did was a public service in exposing the truth.
Up to 5 years?
Well, that's what they're saying at the moment.
Yeah.
And that may be because of public pressure, because people feel that he should not suffer an onerous punishment. But back some years ago, there were key Trump administration officials and members of Congress who were calling for life imprisonment, 50 years, 40 years. So he had understandable fears that if he was extradited to the United States, he would face very, very major charges that would effectively put him in prison for the rest of his life. Whatever you think about Julian Assange, he published information which was the truth. He told the truth about what the American government and military had been doing in the name of the American people but who kept it hidden from the American people and indeed the people of the world. So that, to me, is a public service, not a criminal act.
And he also allegedly carried out a serious sexual assault on more than one woman in Sweden, which is why he was on bail here in the United Kingdom, which is why he jumped that bail.
Yeah, but
just so that we're clear.
Yeah, but I've always said...
What would you expect to happen this afternoon?
But I've always said, I accept those serious charges, and always said that he should face those charges.
Yeah.
And he's been willing to face those charges. And sadly, the Swedish authorities took 5 or 6 years to come to London to interview him. And after the interview, they then decided not to proceed further. So they took the decision not to proceed further.
Because he'd run down the clock?
No, there was still time on the clock. At a certain moment, there was still time on the clock where they could have pursued charges. But you think they might revisit that now? They could. And if they do, then of course he has to answer those charges.
Yes, he does.
Of course he does.
Yes, he does. Of course he does. What do you think might happen this afternoon?
I've got no idea. I suspect the case may be adjourned, but who knows? OK, but I'm guessing he's not going to get bail. I would have thought so. I would have thought not. And as far as, while we've got you, I know we wanted to chat to you last week, but you were, I think, at a stall event, so we couldn't talk to you. But while we've got you, talk to me about what's going on with the Sultan of Brunei and the protests that we're seeing here at some of the hotels in London and I think Paris as well. Do you think it's going to make any difference? This is in relation, of course, to new laws that have been passed there. Stoning to death of children when it comes to things like homosexuality. Adultery, insulting the Prophet Muhammad, many other things are now capital crimes in Brunei. And what's unique about Brunei is that it has introduced these laws for the first time. There are about 10 other countries that have similar laws, but these date back centuries. So what Brunei has done is something unique and goes against the whole trend of human rights, the modern trend of human rights. I'm really pleased that the campaign of boycotts of Sultan-owned properties, hotels and other premises around the world is escalating. I'm glad there's now a boycott going on of Royal Brunei Airlines and many other institutions and businesses with which the Sultan and his regime have connections. I think in time that campaign will be effective. Obviously the Sultan is a very, very rich man, but Brunei is actually going through a period of considerable economic downturn. So I don't think these are costs that they can bear indefinitely. And I think it's really important that we send a signal, not just to Brunei, but to all countries around the world, that violating human rights has a price. We're out of time, but I just wondered what you think they should do in the building behind us about that. Well, I would urge the British government and the royal family to cut ties, or suspend ties for the moment, to the Brunei regime. We certainly should not be having diplomatic, economic or military relations with that anti-human rights regime. Good to talk to you. Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Coming up in just